Hello, and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown, and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Peter.
October in the garden. Wow. Can't believe we had the autumn equinox only the other night, and days are, the same length now as the daytime is the same length as the nighttime, right. And then winter is coming.
The nights are drawing in, as they say.
It,
Yes. Get ready for that time of the year again.
Light the fire and sit in front of it.
Yeah, indeed.
Yes. That's nice, isn't it? But anyway, so what's happening in the news at the moment, Chris? I guess Chelsea's the big one, isn't it?
It was, yes. And obviously, first time in its 108 years, it was in September, which was a bit of a revelation, wasn't it?
I was blown away by the sort of images I saw on television the other night. It looks a bit more spacious there than I ever remember it, and I think a little bit less busy, do you think? Or
yeah, I think so. Certainly, there wasn't quite as large number of exhibitors in the pavilion, the marquees there. Quite a lot of space for people to walk around, obviously for social distancing purposes. But there was quite a lot of gaps in the proceedings, which was a bit of a shame, really, because obviously I'm sure the RHS would have liked to have those filled with exhibitors around there. But of course, it's a different time of the year, so it's can you draw in exhibitors bringing in their flowers and foliage plants at that time of the year?
I guess that was the problem, but it certainly looked. The gardens definitely sort of looked totally different. The selection of plants that were being used at this time, wasn't it? It was really interesting. The hostas were looking fabulous, as were the dahlias, weren't they? And how do you get hostas looking that good this late in the season, Chris?
I don't know how they did it. I know there was the programme on the TV covered the actual exhibitor who'd taken a wonderful display, but even he was slightly cheated by the weather, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, because his main display didn't make it to the show, did it? It
didn't, but however, what he did take looked absolutely amazing. Not there wasn't a slug-ridden leaf in sight. It was
no slug damage, was there? Did you hear his secret recipe for how to keep the slugs away?
That's right. It was a combination of things, wasn't it?
But, I like the garlic water. I thought that was quite a simple one. So a couple of litres of water, a few corms of garlic, and mash them up and boil them, and mash them up a bit more, and then strain it all off. Sounds like really simple.
Yeah, and obviously that works. And also he had like a copper Brillo pad, which he put around the top. I've not seen those. No, I've never seen those before. But I use copper tape, but. Yeah.
Copper tape. I had some old electrical tape. The grey stuff that the electricians use with the copper cable down, the uninsulated copper cable, should I say, down the middle. Yeah. You just strip that out and wrap that round pots, and that seems to work quite well.
Superb, right.
Although my strawberries still seem to manage to get eaten, but I think that's birds as well as slugs.
I think, birds, that's a netting issue then, isn't it? But no, the gardens certainly, I was just blown away by the palette of plants, because if you think about it, September is a tricky month for all of us in our gardens to get colour looking so fresh. But it was so vibrant, there was so many bright colours, heleniums and beautiful Echinacea and Rudbeckias. And something else. There's something else.
The black-eyed Susan.
Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia Goldstrum, I think that was one week, which we sell lots of here. And to see them so good, and obviously just teeming with wildlife as well on the TV screens, it was really encouraging. So, and of course, there's lots of grasses used. And of course, grasses come into their own at this time of the year.
Because they can be really nice. The Japanese garden, where she got some sort of nice grasses in the pots. It was very, very spacious display.
Minimalist.
Minimalist. That's probably a better word to describe it, isn't it? But when you see plants like that silhouetted by themselves, it really shows you their sort of full potential, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think probably what Chelsea always does when you're looking at those little sort of pastiches of gardens, then you say to yourself, well, actually, can I do this at home? And that's the great virtue. There might be just little assets or little characteristics or quirks that a garden designer's used, which you can take home. And that's part of the reason why Chelsea is as popular as it is, for inspiration and for ideas.
Did you see the garden by James Smith? I think it was a terrace or a rooftop garden, wasn't it? I mean, that looked fantastic. Loads of nice herbs and really useful plants that would be great to sort of sit out amongst and no doubt nibble on or smell.
Yes.
But how practical was it?
I mean, it was all pretty crammed, wasn't it? There was a lot of species there, and you just wonder when they're creating these gardens, are they, ticking the boxes for pure points, for prizes, for their awards? Or is there a practicality? My feeling is that perhaps there's a bit of a mixture. So sometimes, with a garden, less is more. And I think maybe with that garden, personally, I think it was a bit too over the top. However, for some people, who are really into their gardening, it would be fine. But for somebody new to gardening, that could be a very daunting project to look after.
I think that's it. So I have seen gardens like that where, like you say, the person who's looking after it is absolutely fastidious and is happy to be out there every day watering the plants and spending their time out there. But for those of us who can only maybe get out in the garden once a week, or possibly spend sort of 5-10 minutes watering at a maximum every couple of days, then it's just not practical, is it?
Certainly not. No, I think you've got to put it on perspective, really. But when then you look at the more grandiose gardens, which obviously Chelsea's well known for, the numbers, Peter, were a lot down to what they usually are in May. Usually we have probably 10 or 12 big show gardens, and this year it was probably half that. We had a lot of artesian gardens, smaller contemporary gardens there, which we normally have. But the big wow gardens just weren't there, and I suspect that was probably through COVID, through the sponsorship of these gardens, because most of them cost, probably you're looking at maybe £250,000 up to £500,000 to put together.
To put them together, I guess so, because the lumps of rock that you see in them is just enormous, and you think, wow, it must have taken a crane or something to lift that in, and
that's it, isn't there? There's so many big, vehicles and earth moving
pergolas and all that.
It
is lovely, but I do always question sort of whether it is how practical it really is for the average person like you or I to create something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of Chelsea being a bit elitist, I don't know. I'm in the camp that at the end of the day, it is a social event. It kickstarts the social scene in the UK, usually,
for the spring.
For the spring,
normally. But
with Ascot and obviously Wimbledon, it's part of the social scene. So, yes, but, I think on the last day of Chelsea, they were asking sort of £80 for a ticket. Is that a reasonable amount of money to pay to go and see a flower show on the last day? Yeah, I don't know, but it's controversial, whatever you think. But to see it on the TV, and albeit in a more restricted way, is probably the next best thing.
Yeah, and it is always like a proper spectacle. I know it might not be for everyone, but it is certainly.
Oh, I love it. I think it's great. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, because the large sort of show gardens really do. I always look at them and think that they're following the sort of fashion industry and the sort of high street trends a little bit, aren't they, with their colour schemes? And I was interested to see sort of that a few years ago, all of the big monoliths and sort of big stones were quite often made out of purple slate, whereas now the industry is going towards black slate, and black slate is the new purple slate.
Indeed.
But equally, it's sort of in one of the gardens they'd painted all the woodwork black, which again you see in sort of people's gardens, and it can look really nice. I mean, even here, sat here where we're recording in the Malvern show buildings, looking out the window here, there's a black shed behind us, and black can work really well in a garden.
Makes a statement, doesn't it?
Definitely, and I think it also sort of good for framing things, and like you say, it stands out, and but like we've discussed, it is following fashions, but the large show gardens, I mean, obviously BBC run their RHS People's Choice Award, and I love sort of picking my winner.
Oh yes.
Which one was yours this year, Chris?
Oh yes, I think it was a close call actually. I did quite like the M&G garden. That was the one with the the painted pipes, black painted pipes.
Yes.
There you go. Only because of it, I love the naturalistic sort of planting to it. It was very, quite immersive, and it was sort of telling a story, but it was a backstory which you needed to know a little bit about to understand the thinking behind it. And sometimes Chelsea gardens don't do that quite as obvious as they should. Usually a common,
I mean, for me, that was not. I just like, why are you putting urban pipe work and sort of making a lovely garden ruining it with bits of metal, and obviously I hadn't spent any time investigating what the story is behind it.
Yep.
And to me, on the surface, it just doesn't add anything to the whole scheme of the things, and I would never have a garden like that in my back garden.
No.
But from an architectural point of view and an artistic point of view, there's definitely a story there, and it is actually worthwhile understanding what they're trying to tell you by these things.
Most definitely. So I went, my option was very organic. I went for the Yeo Valley Organic Garden, which was designed by Tom Massey with Sarah Mead. And it's interesting, I didn't realise that Yeo Valley, as we know, the very famous product which we get in our supermarkets, the yogurt.
I was going to say there's cheese makers and yogurt makers and they're farmers.
Farmers, and they have got a organic garden in Somerset in the Mendips.
Okay,
and what they have done basically is done a pastiche of their garden, which is I think 6.5 acres. They've brought it to Chelsea, and given it a Chelsea look, if you like. Putting in some amazing planting and lots of lovely silver birches, which I love. And
I did see that. It's a nice big, some big plants in there, weren't there?
There was, and obviously all the bits and pieces in the water and all the things you would expect from a Chelsea garden, and zinged it with lots of Rudbeckias and Gnaphofia, red hot pokers. All those plants were looking so good and tempting. And then they'd created, and I had to check on the facts on this, they'd created this basically very naturalistic looking egg-shaped steam bent oak hide, which looked like a big egg.
Was it a swing? What I call a swing seat?
Indeed. It's a very posh swing seat with a glass floor.
Oh wow!
And that was then perched over the stream. So
because it was just over. It was up the back over the stream. I mean, I loved the way they'd hung it and sort of hidden the framework for the seat. It was brilliant and very clever. And like you say, sort of nice big trees at the back and lots of lovely planting in the foreground.
So it was a real garden to sort of unwind in. I can imagine on a hot summer's day, the sound of water, that lovely naturalistic planting. Gosh, it would make you so calm and collected. And what we've been going through over this last 18 months, I think it was a perfect escape. So for that reason, that's why I chose it as my favourite.
Okay, brilliant. Good choice. I mean, to be fair, that was my second most favourite. I think, to me, my favourite this year was the Bodmin Jail. Okay. I just love the way that in such a sort of small area, they've managed to create so much drama and sort of perspective, and the fact that like the back of it was higher and it just flowed well. I thought I like the paths and the sort of little pond which the waterfall cascaded into, and obviously being very trendy, it had black slate rather than purple slate.
Okay, on trend, yes.
But I did enjoy looking through all of them and working out sort of which one appealed most to me. But I think that's the best thing about gardening, isn't it? Is that it's totally personal.
Yeah,
and
very subjective, isn't it? Yes.
What I like might not be what you like, or the garden with the... I mean, the Guangzhou China garden. To me, it's lovely, but I just had no idea what the point of those funny wooden structures were. I mean, they're great, and I'm sure someone spent a lot of time making them. Yeah. But to me,
they were a bit of a folly, weren't they? And perhaps that's what they were meant to be—a bit of a garden folly.
Maybe
in 2021, we need something a little bit different. They were bamboo, laminated bamboo, so very sustainable product, which is good. In sustainability, and I think all the Chelsea gardens, as we know, have another life normally after the show. Some of them are sort of dismantled. Sometimes the plants are sold off, but often the whole garden and the hard landscape goes on to pastures new and is rebuilt.
So hopefully they'll find a use for them in their new garden.
Indeed. Interesting. Yes.
That's it. Good stuff. So one of the things I noticed, Chris, at Chelsea this year was it seemed to me pretty much every single garden you saw had a water feature in it, or a pond in it, or some form of like noise being made by water. And like you said, the trickling sound of water can be very relaxing. But
indeed,
as a fish lover, I couldn't work out why none of the ponds had any nice fish in them. They were all devoid of all sort of water life. And do you know why that was?
It's a bit strange. I just wonder, because they're only set up sort of 2 weeks ago, whether there's a shortfall in the time. But I would have thought these days, that should be sort of overcome. I'm sure there are ways and means of getting the water
aged water and stabilised and what have you. I suppose maybe that's you're right that for the fish, and I should imagine a number of people going through the area might be a bit sort of frightening for the fish as well, possibly.
Yes.
But
yeah, I do remember, I'm sure a few years ago, goldfish were used in a display, and I think it was a mixture of one of these sort of water-through displays where it was a combination of exotic plants, and they'd used, I think, fish tank walls to create an impression. And that was a few years ago, but I stand to be corrected on that, but I'm sure fish have been there. I know garden gnomes are not allowed at Chelsea, but...
shocking.
Yeah, but I think a humble comet or a shibunkin or a koi should have its place there, most definitely. Yeah,
excellent. Was there anything else that caught your eye at Chelsea this year, Chris?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I love clematis. So when I saw Raymond Evison, his display, obviously the famous grower over in Guernsey, producing those amazing plants, which obviously we sell. Most garden centres in the UK sell Raymond's clematis. He's a breeder of extraordinary stands, and he's produced these wonderful miniature compact patio clematis by the thousand, and it was good to see his display looking so good. And also houseplants have made quite an appearance,
haven't they? There's a whole stand.
David Dominy created an amazing display of houseplants showing how they're used both in the home and obviously their health-giving properties as well.
I saw some lovely ferns, and obviously I know a lot of houseplants do give off oxygen, and obviously as we learnt in the Orchid podcast, some of them even give off oxygen at night. But there was a good selection of other plants that I'd never really thought of as sort of air purification sort of modules. And what caught your eye in the houseplant selection?
So lots of lovely ferns, things like the stag's horn fern, and of course the Adiantum. They were featured quite a bit in the display as well. Yep. And actually one of our main suppliers to the garden centre and to the garden centre trade, Givado houseplants, they had some amazing displays, including some in some of the Malvern buildings, which obviously we record our podcast in the garden centre here, and they had other structures dotted around the showground which were beautifully lit at night, including one, shall we say, a little bit disco.
Really?
Yeah.
A disco at Chelsea.
Who would have thought it, Peter? Yes. But no, it's a bit of fun, and of course because Chelsea was when it was in the end of September, of course it gets darker quicker, so of course the visitors could actually enjoy Chelsea by moonlight.
Excellent. Okay. Brilliant. So it'll be interesting to see what's changed to next year's sort of spring Chelsea, and how the format changes again, and all the plants no doubt change again, and we'll see a whole new selection of things in a few months' time.
It will be great to see it back in May, that's for sure.
So is it time to save the Great British Front Garden, or do we risk losing it forever?
Yes, so this is a new report which has come out to say, which we already sort of knew, Peter, that we were losing our front gardens to drop curves and putting our cars onto our front.
Driveways, block paving, tarmac.
Yes. Oh dear, you could just hear the plants making a mass exit from our front gardens, and that's really sad in view of the fact that obviously in the last few years we've seen major problems with flooding. So if you put tarmac and concrete onto your front garden, that's certainly not going to absorb the amount of rainfall, the high rainfall we've been getting over the last few years as well. So where does that go? Goes down the drains, and then obviously
into the rivers and out straight out to sea. It doesn't get the chance to renew the water table, does it? And also you think all the nature that in my grass lawns I always think leather jackets, they're all doing well in breeding
and buttercups and daisies as well. They make an appearance
all the things that feed off my my lawn, and at the end of the day, joking aside, everyone seems to be relying more and more on cars these days, and obviously with the advent of electric cars and the fact that is it 2030 we're meant to be
indeed sort of losing around about that time, isn't it? So not
petrol and diesel cars, and so that's going to be an interesting time. And obviously you don't want to have cables going out into the street, because that's then a trip hazard, and you don't want that. So you want to bring the car in close where you can charge it next to your house. It's a hard one, but certainly I know, thinking of other options other than block paving and tarmac. There's a few garden centres I've been to recently which have a sort of strip of road around their car park, and then lots of gravel parking spaces, which, okay, it's not 100% sort of water into the ground and going into the aquifers, but it's 80-90%. Yes. And yeah, obviously the tarmac does drain into the gravel, which then drains into the ground again. And obviously there's the other thing, I don't know how practical they are, but things like the Comfrey lawns that obviously when you walk over them smell so lovely, whether there's plants that we could use like that to plant in amongst the gravel.
I would say there is. Obviously, what you could do there is where your car is going to be parked. So where the tyres run, you would put down a nice solid base to run those, and then in between, effectively under the car and across each side. And if you've got more than one car, then you could do your alpine planting, your Chamomile lawns, your alpines, your Aringerans, all these very good, your herbs, anything which is nice and substantial, which doesn't mind a little bit of a walking across. Over your thymes would work really well. So there is a good palette of plants which would do that. But the thing is, that would need quite a lot of planning, and it'd be quite expensive, and that's probably going to be one of the deciding factors if people are trying to do this, and they're probably going to try and do it as cheaply as possible. Perhaps they need a bit more guidance. Perhaps that's something perhaps garden centres should look at, perhaps helping our customers with that decision if they go down that route.
Well, yeah, because it is a nice long-term sustainable option, having a driveway that you can park on, charge your car, and also grow some nice plants and get some nice smells and flavours and things like that.
Yeah, certainly many years ago when I lived in London, I used to obviously do the walk to the station, and there was lots of similar situations where, certainly where a terraced house had enough space for actually 2 cars, and people had done some really nice, clever planting around it and use of pots and such like, so they at least had some colour and something to bring the wildlife in. So it is achievable, but it will take a little bit of thinking through, and obviously, at the end of the day, it will take a little bit of money from people to be prepared to pay for that.
Invest in. But if it makes your house look better,
of course,
then surely it's going to add value that way. So
most definitely.
I'm sure it's worthwhile.
And the other thing is, you'll have plants, but you won't have a lawn. And for a lot of people, that's they can put the lawn in the back garden and enjoy it there. So it's not absolutely the end of the world.
That's it.
So the next story I spotted, Peter, is that 1 in 3 trees face extinction in the wild. And this is a new report. It was on the BBC website.
Okay.
And they're suggesting that at least 30% of the world's tree species face extinction in the wild. And that includes things like oaks and magnolias to tropical timber trees. This is really quite worrying.
It's a huge number, isn't it? You always hear sort of stories of like the Amazon and how all the trees are being cut down for farming and making more space for growing crops and cows and things like that. But you don't really think of it in this country, and the fact that I'd never even come across the thought that our native trees are suffering, and I suppose there's obviously diseases and things like Dutch elm disease. Well, that was back in the 70s, wasn't it?
It was indeed, 60s and 70s. Yeah.
Now I suppose things like Vitophora and
Ash dieback, I suppose. Yes, which are the worry ones. But it's interesting. I mean, as you'd expect, the report says that half of the Amazon trees are facing the issues, but and ash trees across Europe are going to disappear, which obviously that is worrying because, in this country there's over 70 million ash trees around, and if you think about the large areas, that's more than there was elm trees. Wow. Going back, so that's going to make some big scars there. And it's interesting, quickly mentioning the Chelsea Flower Show, the big tree planting campaign organised by the government, effectively, and the Queen. Yep. That got its sort of send off. It's got its sign off to be promoted. So that was a good thing. So hopefully, as we're coming into tree planting time over the next, all through the bare root season and beyond, we can look a bit more at our own trees, and may be an opportunity to start planting some more this winter.
What a good idea. And yeah, like you say, sort of, obviously winter's great to get cheaper options for bare root trees. It's so much cheaper, and I won't say easier to plant, but I think they're a bit smaller hole to dig.
Smaller hole, and you can have, I think the secret's going to be, isn't it, to have more. Yes, and also, there's so many other factors, concerning trees now. 1 in 5 species of trees are used by humans for food, obviously for timber, medicine, and more. So it's even more vital that we keep those momentum up for planting trees, wherever we can. And whether the species are native, and this idea, of course, with trees to actually plant not monoculture. So don't go for the same variety. If you've got a bit of land, go for diversity.
Well, certainly it's always nice when you go into a mixed wood, sort of broadleaf woodland, and it's so much better. I love the smell of pine forests and sort of Norway spruce and things like that. I mean, it is nice to go through those sort of forests, but equally when you get to see like bluebells in a wood, and they're generally in mixed native woodlands, and the beech trees, and just thinking sort of all the fun times you have as a youngster picking up like beech nuts or conkers and things like that. And talking of conkers, Chris, there's a little story behind conkers.
There is, yes. So the paradox is that we're into the good old spider season now. We have been for the last sort of month or so.
I think spiders have been everywhere this year. I mean, certainly this summer, I don't think I've ever pulled off as many cobwebs off my garden furniture as I have done this year. But.
And I know I was watering my plants in my garden the other night, and when you walk through a spider's web, it's a bit unnerving, especially when you see the female at the corner of your eye
bouncing around on the web, waiting for her supper.
Indeed, yes. But of course, they're coming into our homes for warmth, and obviously to get food and to mate and to start their youngsters off. So it's how to deter those good old spiders. And of course, you mentioned conkers. That's a bit of folklore, but apparently if you have some conkers which you've removed from the shell and they're nice and shiny, and you're not going to have a conker competition with them, you're not going to put them in the oven or put them in vinegar to harden, going back to my childhood here, then you would put them on your window ledge, and apparently according to folklore, that deters them. Have you heard? Yes, have you heard that, Peter?
I have heard it.
Yes.
I don't know whether it works. So I guess if any of our listeners out there have tried it and it does work or it doesn't work, please let us know so we don't waste our time, or we do start doing it. Because I know Abington Park, my local dog walking park, it's got lots of conker trees. There's a whole avenue, and it's lovely this time of the year. You go down and you see all the children picking up conkers, and I love the sort of the shine on the conker when it's just come out of its shell, and it's glossy.
And even the seed pod, it's quite spiky, isn't it?
It's got seed pod.
It's quite it's fantastic. It's almost alien, isn't it, when you look at it? And also, I mean, if any of our followers have any suggestions about keeping spiders out of the house, that other than conkers, that would be quite interesting as well.
Any other folk tales that actually work? That'd be really useful.
That'd be good.
Thank you. So Northampton, I say last year, I think maybe last year and the year before, the council have very kindly changed all of the old sodium street lighting into LED street lighting. Personally, in my street, it's I say it's lighter, it's brighter, and obviously uses less energy, which I guess is good for the planet, but it's not good for the moths, is it?
No. So we've got this sort of movement now from sodium now to LED lights, so which obviously are brighter, and that's obviously having a big impact on the population, and of course that's interfering with their whole process of breeding too. So I think it is a bit worrying, and when you look at the stats, and the population of moths has dropped by over a third in 50 years.
Dear, that's a shame.
That is a lot, isn't it? And I think moths get a bit of bad press because we tend not to see moths apart from the night time.
Yep.
And you know they're there. But interestingly, unlike butterflies, when they land, butterflies generally bring their wings in. Moths, when you see them out, always have their wings outstretched. Okay. That's quite characteristic of a moth. So if you're undecided to whether moths are good, but interesting, there's been lots of obviously research onto the different types, and we've found that anecdotally local to the garden centre here, that it's very easy to get quite captivated by moth watching, and of course by setting up a nice moth trap. Which again uses light, but in a good way. You're going to release these moths once you've identified them, maybe photograph them, and it's a good way of again connecting with nature. We talk about going on butterfly hunts and things and such like. So why not have a look at that? So
moth hunt.
Yes.
I always think they're great for bats because obviously you see the bats flying around. I know in my house I grew up in, there's the front garden. We always used to get bats flying around. And I think they were always feeding on insects and things like the moths were flying around. So they're good part of the food chain. So it's obviously going to have a big impact on the animals that feed on them, as well as not being able to see them.
Exactly. Of course, that's they are a vital part of the food chain at the end of the day. You obviously birds and mammals and things will eat moths too. So as gardeners, I think we should, perhaps it's just a reminder that when we're planting our gardens, to think about good moth food, have good facilities there.
Because presumably they're pollinators in the same way butterflies are.
They are, yes.
So they're part of the pollinators of the world.
And they tend to be attracted by night-scented plants. So a lot of plants that flowers open. I'm growing a few Datura this year in my garden, and they attract certain types of moths. I haven't seen them yet. I am looking in the evening. I'm going to try and capture them on camera if I can. But again, they are quite specific. And of course, I know cacti in the desert have certain moths which come in, and as we know, hummingbirds go to cacti flowers, but it's the moths which actually pollinate the flowers.
Wow.
So they're in a very short window of pollination. The flowers open at night when they know they're going to get pollinated by the moths. So it's all quite clever. But on the podcast show notes, we'll put a link to a little piece of information, a leaflet we've created, and also it gives some indication of some of the plants you might want to think about putting in your garden to be more moth friendly.
Excellent. So what's actually going on this month, then, Chris?
We've got quite a lot, Peter. So from the top then, we've got, we're into the seed gathering season, which started actually at the latter end of September. It runs right through to the 23rd. So it's it's one of these awareness days where we try and promote the idea of saving seeds.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people might save their, broad beans or runner beans or some of their flower seeds. I collect all my honesty seeds, and I've got some calendulas I'm collecting this year from my plants. So yes, go out there in the, obviously in the wild, you've got to be a little bit careful what you collect. Obviously there are rules and regulations for that, but in your own garden, you can obviously save away. I think the most important thing with seed saving is make sure the seeds are dry, so let them dry out nicely. Lift them, take them from the plant, put them on a bit of blotting paper or a bit of tissue, kitchen roll,
and leave them to dry
out. And then when they're nice and dry, then obviously store them in a little sealed container. I remember when we used to have 35mm camera film rolls.
The little black.
When they were great, of course. But if you can get yourself some little envelopes and then obviously put a name on them, put a date on them, so you know exactly when you collected them and what's on there, and then store them in a nice, cool, dry place, and then you're ready.
Yeah, because something that a few years ago I used to collect my runner bean seeds, and I always historically have grown Enorma.
Oh yeah, good variety.
Always thought Enormous every year. I always try and grow two varieties, and I've yet to find one that's as good as Enorma. However, my father told me there's no point collecting those seeds because Enorma's a F1 hybrid. Therefore, as soon as you cross it with another broad bean,
it's not Enorma.
It's not Enorma. So I was like, oh.
Yes.
Gave up connecting seeds. But to be honest with you, I think that's true with a lot of hybridized.
Yeah, so you got F1 hybrids, F1 hybrids, and then you've got what they call open pollinated. The open pollinated varieties you can save. So so if they've not got an F1 hybrid on the label when you buy it or on the seed packet, you can save it from those. So
brilliant. And it's also International Coffee Day, isn't it? So all you budding baristas out there,
rejoice.
Yes, that's it. When's that?
Yeah, 1st of October, so first of the month. And basically, we're celebrating. And of course, obviously, we know coffee and coffee grounds have quite a good horticultural link, don't they? We use them a lot.
Quite a lot of uses for coffee grounds, aren't there? And any customers or listeners local to us that want free coffee grounds, then obviously we create quite a few from the coffee machine here. Please just come into the restaurant and ask, and bring us a bag or a pot, and we'll fill it up with used grounds for you. And what can you use them for, Chris? Yeah,
so you've got to be careful how much you use. If you use too much around your plants for deterring slugs, say, you will change the soil's acidity, so you'll make the soil a bit more acid. So you need to be careful there, but certainly putting small amounts around where your hostas are coming through in the spring, your delphiniums, all your very vulnerable plants, and obviously plants on your veg plot, be good. This year I'm going to try, and I will be trying as I put my tulips in the next few weeks, putting some coffee grounds around my tulip bulbs to deter other furry friends from taking and robbing my lovely tulip display, which they did last year. So so I'm going to use that. So it has dual usage as an insecticide stroke pesticide,
slug
deterrent, and maybe soil acidifier as well. But to use them sparingly, I think that's the key.
So just thinking a little bit more about that, Chris, if the coffee grounds are acidifying the soil, are they going to be good for putting around your rhododendrons?
Yeah, I think small quantities wouldn't do any harm at all, especially if your soil is a little bit on the alkaline side. You're sort of edging your bets where you're growing your plants, and certainly around your Japanese maples. Yes.
And what about hydrangeas? I mean,
hydrangeas. Yeah, if you want to keep the colour. Yeah, indeed, they'd be perfect. Yeah, so Pyrrhus, camellias, rhododendrons, and obviously your azaleas too. So, but sparingly, shall we say?
Okay. And you're doing a masterclass, aren't you, as well, Chris?
Yeah, on the 6th, Wednesday the 6th, we're going to be looking at trees, shrubs and hedges for smaller gardens.
Okay.
So we're looking at, as gardens are getting smaller, or as people are moving to properties where their garden is less adventurous as far perhaps as it used to be to what you could put in there, I'm going to be looking at the options for smaller spaces. So it's always an interesting choice, and it's a great opportunity to obviously talk about autumn planting as well. So I look forward to that. That'll be 4:00 in the restaurant there, and we do obviously suggest that our customers, if they're coming along, book a seat to secure a seat.
The masterclasses are free, but obviously indeed. Limited spaces. So please indeed. Let us know, and then we can advise you if we think we're going to be sold out.
Indeed, yeah. So, but looking forward to that, and it's always a good talk because it's something where you can interact with so many ideas, and obviously the range of trees for smaller gardens and shrubs these days is so wide. So there's plenty of choice.
Brilliant. And Apple Day, I mean, we always celebrate Apple Day here, and we do Apple and Honey Weekend.
Yes.
Because we've already had Apple and Honey Weekend, but the official date is the 21st of October.
It is, yes. And that was the date initiated by Common Ground back in 1990. So this event has been going, 31 years, hasn't it? So
we've been doing it an awfully long time, it seems now. And,
yes.
It's interesting because I think when we first got involved with it, it was over in
Solgrave, I think.
Solgrave Manor. Because Solgrave Manor was home of George Washington, and that's where I can remember going and to their first Apple weekends, and then I think they dropped it and we took over or carried on doing sort of our Apple displays, and it always amazes me. I know there are hundreds of varieties of apples, but when you actually come and see the displays that we put on, and you've got like 50, 60 different types of apple out on display, and you see
They are, yeah. Well, there's I think there's 2,500 varieties, grown in the UK. So 2,500, and at our recent Apple weekend, we had over 100 this year. So pretty good, and that includes things like your crab apples too. So and it's just a celebration. It was the whole reason for it was to basically sort of the symbol of how the apple is to us. It is probably the most popular fruits, probably the easiest to grow of all the fruits, and it's so diverse in what you can do with it, in the kitchen. So for that reason, and of course you can use it for other purposes.
And what's your most favourite apple to eat, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I must admit I do like scrumptiouses, which is a one which I've got in my own garden. They're very small this year. The weather hasn't helped with those, but they are a really nice one. But a nice Bramley in an apple pie. I'm sorry.
I think I totally agree with you. To me, Bramleys are the apple for cooking with, and I always love a sweet apple pie, which is the antithesis of my mother's idea of what an apple. She has a tart apple pie. But for me, I mean, it's always been Egremont russet.
Yes, yeah.
I think as an eater, a nice Egremont russet. The skin can sometimes be a little bit tougher, but the flavour of a good Egremont russet, I just love them.
Yeah, I mean, Discovery, it's one I used to grow in my previous garden. That was always very reliable. I think the thing is you want a variety which is going to do well, and it's not going to take too much space. And of course, if you've not got the space, it's just having space for one tree. So Cox's Self-Fertile would be the one to go for there, or maybe a Scrumptious, because that's self-fertile too. So you've got the best of both worlds, good flavour and something easy. And of course, these days we've got varieties on dwarfing rootstock, so you don't need a huge garden
And the family apple tree.
Yes,
so you can have. I remember giving one of those to a friend for their wedding present, and he was blown away. He's like, "You get 4 different types of apple off one tree." I was like, "Yeah." But they take a bit more effort pruning, don't they?
Yes.
Because you've got to make sure that one doesn't sort of become the leader and take out all the energy out of the tree. But if you look after them, they can be really good.
They can, and so certainly a talking point in your garden. That's for sure.
So, Chris, what should we be doing? What are the tasks we need to be getting on with for October?
There's a few. Some of them are more enjoyable than others, but the first one is very nice, and that's to go and enjoy our wonderful woodland and forests and enjoy and embrace that awesome colour out there.
The leaves are yellowing and going red, and it's...
Yes, it's good. It's a good time of the year, isn't it, for those autumn walks? And of course, there's so many good places to go and see, and lots of the National Trust places in the UK usually have some amazing established woodland. And some of the amazing sort of beech woods as well start to look really good.
Yep.
And certainly a couple of places I've seen which I have been blown away by is Stour Head over in Wiltshire. That's a National Trust that has some amazing, because it's got lots of water. It's a capability brown creation.
Okay. Yep.
So you can imagine these amazing sort of tapestries of colour on the horizon. They look really good. And of course, good arboretums. I mean, Batsford is really good over in the Cotswolds to us here, and that's a really good place to escape and see some really good autumn colour. But and even just a walk in your own local woods is always very refreshing. And of course, you get all this wonderful leaf mould, which of course is derived from those fallen leaves.
Yeah, because that makes really good compost, doesn't it, from memory?
It does, yeah. I mean, leaf mould can take a while to break down. It's a 2-year job really, to break down. And some leaves are better than others. Certainly, certain things like hornbeam and beech and oak will make the best leaf mould, but they will take some time. And how you do it, I mean, if you've got a small garden, get yourself some nice robust sort of black bin liners, prod some holes with a fork, and then just fill the bag about halfway with the leaf mould, seal it, pop it in part of the garden which is out of the way, you can't see it, and leave it basically to ferment.
Right.
And after 2 years you'll be able to open that, and hopefully it'll have broken down to a point where you can actually use that as a compost additive. So you can mix your own compost. Good old Monty uses quite a lot of leaf mould in his compost on Gardener's World, but there's no reason why you can't, put it into your own compost mixes.
Well, I was going to say, I always thought you just piled your leaves up on your compost heap and it created just another layer of goodness to sort of break down. And
yes, I think if you've got a lot of leaves, best to get some chicken wire and put some posts and create your own leaf mould heap.
Right.
Because I think the problem is if you put them into your normal compost heap, because they take so long to break down, that'll interfere with your faster maturing compost additives. So I'm always a little bit reluctant to add it to my normal compost heap. Do it as a separate project.
See, Chris, you're doing it all wrong. If you've got a compost heap like mine, where you chuck branches and all sorts in there, 2 years is just about getting to the point where it's starting to break down enough that you can think, oh, that'd be good compost in a year or two.
Okay. All right. Oh, well, there we go.
I take your point. Yeah. Obviously, you can make compost in sort of 3 to 6 months and make very good compost
supposedly,
in a season.
It does take a while, as we all know, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think if you're a bit more slow moving and not in such a rush, then chuck it on your compost heap.
But it's worth. And also, if you're in an area of the UK, or you're listening, obviously, where you've got very acidic plants, so you've got your pine trees. We mentioned pine trees earlier, and all your rhododendrons, azaleas, your pyrus, and you collect all those. Then, of course, you're going to make some amazing acid loving leaf mould.
So, is that how you make ericaceous compost?
Yeah, you're part way there. Yes, it's one of the main ingredients. Yes.
I never thought of that.
Yes,
so interesting.
So you can do that. So if you're in that area, then obviously use that. But obviously don't mix them both, because if you mix them up, you can only then use it really for your ericaceous plants.
Good point. And you just see in the garden centre we've got autumn lawn food in. It must be time to start feeding a few things now.
Yeah, I suppose it's that time of the year when we're giving our lawn a little bit of a TLC, perhaps scarifying it and obviously raking and doing a bit of aeration to try and get some air in there. But yes, as it's been quite a reasonable autumn, rain-wise, hopefully there won't be too much moss to kill.
I seem to remember that autumn lawn food's sort of got lots of potassium for the roots. So it's sort of helping the root growth. You don't want the high nitrogen feed the summer foods, because that obviously makes the top half grow, whereas what we're looking for now is to fortify the roots
to get some nice strong roots for the winter, basically, to put those in place. But if you go for something like the Miracle-Gro Evergreen autumn lawn food, that does have a little bit of ferrous sulfate, so that will control your moss as well.
Get rid of the moss. And has it got anything for the clover?
From the top of my head, I don't think it's just purely a feed and a moss killer. So so it does that. It's probably getting a little bit late, probably to kill a lot of your weeds now, because of course they're probably starting to die back anyway, and of course we know with weeds they need to be in active growth for the herbicide to work effectively. But get on, obviously follow the instructions carefully. With my lawn, when I had a lawn, I usually cut it, leave it 4 or 5 days, and then I'd put the lawn food on, and then obviously make sure there's plenty of moisture around. Hopefully our heavy dew falls we're getting now this time of the year is sufficient, but you might have to irrigate if we have a dry spell, because you don't want to be scorching your lawn. And then hopefully you'll start to see some benefits through the winter. A nice strong sward, which will obviously come better and give you a much better effect next spring.
Brilliant, good idea. We've just heard in our previous podcast Ian Clark from Taylor's talking us through bulbs. We've got obviously still time left to plant some bulbs, haven't we?
Yes. So, one thing we do like to do with bulbs is sometimes stagger the planting. And certainly if you're wanting hyacinths for Christmas, you really need to get a move on with those. It's probably going to be hyacinths for New Year now, probably. Yep. But as we sort of mentioned in the previous podcast, your tulips can go in this month onwards now. It's now a little bit cooler. And the reason we say about not planting tulips too early is two things. Sometimes they can produce lots of top growth, which can get obviously affected by frost, but more to the point, you can encourage a disease called it's one of the fire, the tulip fire streak virus can affect the plants. So for that reason as well, it's better to delay your planting your tulips into October and even into November. So we've got plenty of time to get those in. And of course, it's still time to do your containers. I know the pots have been looking really good with this bit of nice sunshine we've had this autumn. So maybe think about getting those pots converted over to some spring colour as well with winter pansies and obviously the other bits and pieces you tend to put in your baskets at this time of year. Ivies and heathers and similar plants to give you a bit of nice inspirational colour for the winter too. And obviously add a few bulbs in the spaces you have in those containers.
Brilliant, that's a good idea, because we've got a lovely display as you come into the shop with bulbs and sort of how to do a lasagna planting, haven't we?
We have now,
really
yes.
Impressed by that, that's quite good. And obviously, like I say, if you haven't come across this idea, either listen to the previous podcast or have a look on the show notes for us, and there's some good links into...
Yes, a nice little video from Taylor's Bulbs on there to how to do one of the lasagna pots. Very easy, very satisfying.
Good stuff. Yeah, because just thinking about the slug deterrent, it's that time of year to start planting garlic, isn't it?
It is, yes. Yeah, so that's garlic, and you've got your shallots and your onions, all that range of bulbous plants which obviously need to get away in soil which is reasonably warm, so it's quite important. So make sure you've prepped your soil, make sure it's well worked, not too open, not too loose, because of course you'll get the better bulbs from more compacted soil. And of course when it comes to garlic, it's always a good idea to break the bulbs into the individual cloves, and then when you plant them, use a trowel or a bulb planter to so you're not actually damaging the base of the bulb as you push it in. Okay. It can be quite fragile, so give them the best possible start. And of course with your onions, you just sort of barely, so they just sort of disappear, so the very tips of the plants can be seen. And fingers crossed they'll start growing within probably a week, 10 days. They'll get some roots down, and hopefully the birds won't try and pull them out, which sometimes happens. So give yourself that. And then obviously make sure they're given a good water in if it's dry. And then you're off. Then you're making a nice early start. So you'll be hopefully gathering some onions by hopefully by the beginning of July, if not earlier.
Yeah, because I've already seen, so you wake up in the morning and looking across the valley, the mist starting to settle, and I guess that means not long till frosts and winter setting in, isn't it?
Yeah, and then it's just such a shame, isn't it? I mean, things like Mecanas and Medalias looking so good, and you just know that Jack Frost is literally knocking on the door, and
as soon as he turns up, they'll all be turning upside down.
They will, and So with Dahlias, let Jack Frost do its work. Let it blacken the leaves. I always think because it's usually well into this month and sometimes early into next month, into November, before you get that hard frost which knocks the plants back. And then obviously you want to lift the plants, and then if you've got a shed or somewhere nice and bright where you've got some air circulating, lift the tubers, dry the tubers off a little bit to get rid of all the soil around them, and then store them. Obviously, you can store them in all sorts of things. I mean, people sometimes use shredded paper, peat, or a compost.
Something dry, sort of lots of air, so it's not going to rust, and it keeps the air moving around them.
And make sure you put a label on to identify your varieties, especially dahlias. With cannas, cannas I just bring in. There comes a point where you just know they're going to be lost. Bring those in. I just basically put mine on their size, so if they're in pots, if I've had them in pots, put them on the side. If they're in nice decorative containers, they're in big glazed pots and things. You can't do that. Just withhold watering, so let them naturally die back. And I leave them in situ then until February. Then I usually lift them out, divide them, and then restart them into growth. So dahlias and cannas are probably, if you've got bananas and they are not staying in the garden, you're not going to be lagging them for the winter, then you probably need to be bringing those into a greenhouse, and somewhere which is obviously frost free. You need probably 4 or 5 degrees above freezing to keep those alive.
I'm just thinking, Chris, with bananas, can you bring them, if you've got a conservatory or an orangery or sort of somewhere warm and bright in the house and enough space,
Indeed,
can you bring them inside?
You could do. I mean, there's no reason. If it's not, Musa, Cavendishii and Basu, those are the two sort of what they call the hardier ones. If you're growing something which is not either of those two, then a conservatory or a nice warm greenhouse would be perfect, actually. Okay. And make sure they're in a decent sized pot, of course, a pot which you can easily handle inside your structure, and just keep them barely moist. Don't overwater them.
Right.
And that means the plants should keep, because as you probably know with bananas, they are herbaceous perennials. Yep. They're full of water. And if you keep them too wet, and that really applies if you're overwintering your more hardier ones, keep them on the drier regime, if anything, and fingers crossed they'll come through. And yes, in the winter they'll probably carry on growing, albeit slowly. But you might then obviously initiate potential flower, and then you might initiate some fruits. And it has been known over the winter for them to go through that sort of process. So when you put the plants out in May, June next year, then they go on to produce a crop.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
It would.
Bunch of bananas off your own tree.
Fantastic.
And plants that are sort of semi-hardy, I suppose you call them, things like cordylines and
some of the palms, maybe.
Trachycarpus. If you're going to leave those outside, I seem to remember that we've got fleece jackets, I think they're called, aren't they?
That's right, yeah. I think it's a company called Hacksnicks sell those, and they're really good. So they're basically like a jacket or a big sock, basically.
I always think they're like a big dustbin bag that may have fleece, and sort of tie them off at the bottom around the plant, and it just gives the plant a little bit more protection against the cold and harsh winds. I was
going to say, it's far better to use one of those than often people tie the cordylines up, and then they then wrap the horticultural fleece on a roll around it. I think that's a bit cumbersome. And of course you're basically squashing the leaves too. So fleece jackets. But then of course you can use horticultural fleece in your greenhouse to cover your plants, which you're overwintering as well. So if you've got some fuchsias and things, and you're just keeping your greenhouse frost free, then of course that layer of horticultural fleece will just raise the temperature by a degree or two, enough to keep the plants hopefully safe and sound.
And presumably you can use that on things like your onions down on the allotment, so if you want to really get them growing faster than your neighbours.
Indeed.
If you've got one of those sort of little cloches that you can cover in, they're not cloches, are they? They're cloche hoops, should I call them?
Yeah.
The sort of U-shaped hoops that you can put, and then you can create a little sort of nice little warmer, sheltered environment for.
I think that product. I think is it Enviromesh, because they have different grades, don't they? So Enviromesh will be the one to go for where you're going to try and give a little bit of protection, and obviously keeps some of the pests out too. So, and that'll act as a bit of a greenhouse effect too.
Help protect the plants, but get them growing a bit earlier as well.
Indeed, but please don't use. I mean, the tales when people use bubble wrap around plants and things. I do shudder. It's just not good. It just basically what happens. Of course, you get condensation. The plants. I was
going to say they sweat.
They sweat, and of course that freezes on a cold night, and you just know it's all going to end very, very badly. So if you're going to use
bubble wrap's great for insulating greenhouses.
Yes,
perfect.
As
it's designed for.
Or insulating your pots as well. If you use it around the side of your pots, it's absolutely fine. If you've got some expensive terracotta pots which you are trying to preserve, even though they may be sold as frost-free,
frost resistant.
That's the word. But putting some of your larger grade bubble wrap round won't do any harm, as long as you don't impinge on the drainage.
Yep.
That's absolutely fine. And
good idea.
I've done that with a couple of my more expensive pots, and it's paid off.
Brilliant. So we've got a couple of really interesting podcasts coming up, haven't we, Chris? We've got the first one, we're jumping off our usual schedule, and we've got an extra show for you. So if you want to understand a bit more about cider making, then have a listen to our show next week. And then following on from that, we've got an interview with Mike Jones on
creating an orchard and everything you need to know about setting up fruit trees in your own garden.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, originally we'd scheduled it as one show, but Mike is just so knowledgeable. He goes
so enthusiastic, and of course it's all from his own experience, and he's got obviously many years of experience growing and producing his wonderful cider too. So it's enthusing, and yes, you'll want to go out and plant some apple trees after listening, that's for sure.
Definitely. And please, listeners, if you've got any questions for us about planting fruit or cider making, please send them in on email or post them on our social media accounts, and we'd love to hear from you, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions.
And I'll say likewise, Peter, if anybody's got any questions on general gardening things they need to know the answer to, whether it's a bit of advice on growing a particular plant or if they've got a pest or disease, again, you can send us some information, maybe a photo of the offending pest and disease or the plant you want to identify, and we'll do our best to answer your questions.
Yeah. That'd be really good to hear from you as well. Brilliant. Well, thanks for all your help with what we should be doing in October, Chris.
Pleasure, Peter.
Speak to you soon.
Yeah, see you now. Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.